And we are live.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Is the is the Bitcoin bull market over? I think you can tell from my tone, we don't think so. Uh, Updates on potential Bitcoin strategic reserves, uh, big time shakeups in the White House press corps, lots to discuss. But why don't we dig in, Sam? Should we start with Bitcoin?
Yeah, let's start with the topic du jour. Is the Bitcoin bull market over? Because even though we have our own skepticism on that question, there's a lot of fear in the markets right now. For starters, Bitcoin has actually dipped below $90,000 for the first time since November. Let's take a quick look at the chart here. So there's technical some technical analysis out there. Take that for what you will. A lot of people say that TA is just astronomy for men, but there are some people out there who think that the bullish market structure that Bitcoin has had is breaking down. I think a lot of these people forget that we ranged for about 7 months last year, chopping between about $70,000 and $50,000. It felt like it would never end. They called it not the bear market or the bull market, but the crab market because it was making crab-like motions for about 7 months there. We could be entering another crab market. We could be entering a bear market. We could be very much still in the bull market. That is the big question we want to talk about today. And Brian, we talked about this question last week because there's this huge discrepancy between bullish Bitcoin policy news and bearish Bitcoin price action. And it seems like that gap between Bitcoin policy and Bitcoin price has grown even wider in the last week. I think this single Mickey Mouse meme sums up the state of the market right now. Here you have Bitcoin on the regulatory front versus what Bitcoin looks like in the charts. You have Mickey Mouse at Disneyland versus Mickey Mouse hiding and disheveled underneath a bombed out basement. So things are a little rough in the market right now. Nevertheless, there's so much to be optimistic about in the Bitcoin policy space. So Brian, what's your take this week? Do you think this is just markets being inefficient still, or are there other reasons beyond that for this drawdown that we've seen?
I think it could be market inefficiencies. I think it could be um, sometimes there's just periods of time where people harvest profits. They maybe sense a little uncertainty in the broader market. I mean, over the course of the life of Bitcoin, it has oftentimes been viewed as a risk asset that people invest in when they have some extra scratch laying around. And then when times get a little bit more turbulent, they tend to sell their Bitcoin. So there have been some statements in recent days from big time investors, including Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets, who is a multi-billionaire investor for many years. He was talking about how, there's some uncertainty right now. Trump is bringing in tariffs, negotiating new deals. The Republicans in Congress are working on the reconciliation bills where they may or may not pass, extension of tax cuts. Maybe that'll last for a few years. Maybe it'll be permanent. Who knows? There are just a lot of things being worked out right now that I think has introduced some volatility into the market. So it could be that. But if you had told us last year or the year before or any year prior to this that Bitcoin had, quote, crashed below 90,000,
True.
I would have said, wow, that's great. So I think, people need to put things in perspective because the future is still very bright. There's still a supply cap on Bitcoin. It's still being adopted by people and institutions and governments all over the world. And so with limited supply and virtually unlimited demand, the future is still very bright. We're just in a moment of a little bit of uncertainty.
Agreed. I think people need to remember as well that a 30% drawdown is very normal in a Bitcoin bull market. This happens all the time. In the last Bitcoin bull market, I believe we had 30% drawdowns, and this drawdown hasn't even reached 30% yet. I think we're at about 15 or 18% right now. So I don't think it's cause for concern. Of course, there is always consolidation in any bull market, and this is just par for the course, especially with Bitcoin. And if you can't stomach the volatility, then Bitcoin probably isn't for you. So my suggestion to people interested in investing in the space is buy your Bitcoin and never look at the charts ever again. Just look at your account maybe every couple years, every few years, because Bitcoin is a long-term savings instrument, not a short-term meme coin that will make you get rich quick. It's something that will help you store your wealth over the long term, though. So a lot of interesting news there. Of course, just to play devil's advocate here, it's a common refrain at the peak of a bull market that this time is different. We're entering into a new paradigm. This is a new technology that will forever revolutionize the way human beings interact with the world. You've seen this in any hype cycle with any new technology, starting with, the internet bubble in the early 2000s, late 1990s, to potentially AI today. And we've seen it multiple times with Bitcoin. However, we're also seeing this potentially right now in the Bitcoin bull market. One of our colleagues, Pierre Rochard, who is a Bitcoin sage, he has been in the space for many years. He had a really interesting post yesterday, though, that said in many more words, this time really is different. Can we pull that up, Dylan? So Pierre's take here is that this truly is a different kind of bull market because you have far more institutional adoption than we've ever seen before. So you're not going to have the same parabolic price increases that we've seen in previous bull markets. At the same time, you won't see such steep drop-offs as we've seen in previous markets before. This is in large part due to increasing institutional demand. You have big banks getting in. You have potentially nation states getting in as well. So Pierre's take is that we're looking at a longer, more tempered cycle. And as he says, such an environment will better reflect organic adoption as institutional retail buyers adopt Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So really interesting take there. However, there is also fear in the market because one of the telltale signs of a peak in any hype cycle is the infamous Forbes cover. And the Forbes cover that we saw most recently featured none other than Bitcoin bull Michael Saylor. And so for those who have PTSD from the last bull market, they might remember SBF was featured on the Forbes cover not too many years ago. And then, of course, you had many others before that. So Michael Saylor being on the cover of Forbes, some thought that that was a peak signal of some kind, a top signal. Brian, what's your take, though, on this idea that maybe this time really is different?
Well, I think Pierre makes a good point. I mean, the market is maturing. I recall being at a very interesting roundtable discussion, this is years ago, with policy experts at a well-known think tank here in Washington and people from around the world and from around America. And volatility was one of the topics of conversation. And the kind of takeaway from that was that when there's more adoption, when the market is more mature, when there's been more reliable price discovery, then the volatility will, probably decrease. We'd see less extreme swings, and so I think that's just a different way of looking at, I guess a similar way to the way Pierre is looking at it, because now that there's, what is it, 19 million out of the 21 million that will ever exist are in circulation at this point. We now have some of the largest financial institutions in the world. We have the ETFs trading. There's been a lot more price discovery. And now with the halvings having, obviously less of an impact because we're at the fourth, I think there's something to that. That the extreme bull markets, the extreme swings back and forth will decrease over time as the market matures. So I recall hearing that conversation and being a part of it, years ago, and I think it's just coming true. What very smart people have been predicting for years is finally starting to happen. And that, by and large is a good thing, because I think volatility has scared people away from the asset, in the past. But I think as more and more people adopt it, the price gets truly discovered, you see less extreme swings. I do think it might be as simple as that.
I think it might be as simple as that as well. And let's suppose that this time isn't different, that the current cycle is just the same as any previous cycle before it. Well, if that's our base case, then we still don't have any reason to believe that the bull market is over. And what's my data for that? If you look at previous bull markets, the time from the Bitcoin halving to the time of the Bitcoin top has increased every single halving cycle. So in the last cycle, from the time of the Bitcoin halving to the time of the Bitcoin peak, it took well over 500 days to reach that peak. However, we've only been about 300 days since the last halving. And if we're assuming that the trend continues, that the space between the Bitcoin halving and the Bitcoin peak continues to increase, we could still have another 9 months, another year, just assuming that this cycle follows a similar pattern to the last. So we have much evidence to believe that this time, even if it's not different, the bull market is very unlikely. Still, the bull market is likely to continue. And so that's real cause for optimism, I believe. I think some of the other disillusionment we see, especially in Twitter right now, is the fact that Bitcoin has crushed, absolutely crushed all other altcoins out there. Altcoins are sort of these other cryptocurrencies that try to ride off of the coattails of Bitcoin, and they have severely underperformed in this particular cycle. So, as evidence, let's just look at the Bitcoin versus Ethereum chart. So, this is Ethereum's performance over the last few years as denominated in Bitcoin. And as you can see here, Ethereum has underperformed Bitcoin significantly for the past 4 years. It's been almost down only. And I think there's a lot of disillusionment among crypto circles about the state of the market because their cryptocurrencies really are not doing well compared to Bitcoin. You haven't seen this alt season like you've seen in previous crypto cycles. In addition to that, we have other bullish news. We have Citadel Securities wanting to become a liquidity provider for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So again, you have all this positive institutional adoption. I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of panic amongst retail circles and amongst bag holders of various altcoins, while you're at the same time having a lot of institutional adoption, a lot of adoption from smart money. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind as we evaluate whether or not the Bitcoin bull is over or whether we still have a couple of legs left. Brian, any take on any of that recent information?
No, I think you're right on. I think for people not yet familiar or not maybe steeped in the sector as much as we are, Bitcoin is different. It's not just the OG, although it is. It's unique in that it's truly decentralized and it's truly supply capped, and it is unlike pretty much anything else that relies a lot more on humans and human nature and a particular foundation or company. Bitcoin really is different. So that's why a lot of I think you see the separation in the market between it and others. Historically, others have kind of ridden the coattails, but just because people look at it as a traditional, asset class, and that they should just hedge their bets. But as we've said before, Bitcoin and crypto are not exactly synonyms. So I think you're seeing the difference there. And there's a reason why states across the country are pursuing strategic Bitcoin reserves, not strategic crypto reserves, but Bitcoin reserves, because it is the modern digital version of a precious metal. So I don't know. That's the way I think about it. It's nice to see Citadel come around. We saw BlackRock come around and others, Fidelity, other name brand financial institutions have been coming around to it. It's nice to see another one, a true market maker. So very bullish signs, and the SBRs are bullish signs as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the SBRs. Let's talk about Ohio. Ohio actually just recently passed a Bitcoin reserve bill out of committee. So, of course, it hasn't been passed into law yet. The fact that it's advanced past committee is a huge development. And then, of course, we have Texas as well, where our operations are centered. Texas is advancing what will likely be the first Bitcoin reserve bill. A lot of positive developments on that front. And what's fascinating to me is that the United States are likely to front run the United States government in creating Bitcoin reserves. So really bullish news out of Ohio, out of Texas as well. And let's zoom out onto the federal front. More bullish news there. We have exciting news that Senator Cynthia Lummis will co-chair a special event that's being hosted by the Bitcoin Policy Institute on March 11th. As she says here in this tweet, I'm thrilled to announce I will be the honorary co-host for Bitcoin for America. Hope you can tune in on March 11th. Big things cooking. You always love it when Senator Lummis says big things cooking because she usually means it. The last time she was teasing big development, she introduced the first strategic Bitcoin reserve bill in Congress, which really kicked everything off here. So, Brian, can you tell us more about this BPI event, Bitcoin Policy Institute event that's being hosted on March 11th, and why this is a big deal?
Yeah, it's a big deal because it's going to assemble leaders from Congress, CEOs from the industry, some true luminaries. I think probably nobody would make the case for a strategic Bitcoin reserve better than Michael Saylor, and he is going to give a keynote there that will be live streamed and available to the public. I think it's going to be a very worthwhile roundtable event. Look, we've had meetings around DC for years, and where we are right now is that they're looking at a stablecoin bill, a broader market structure bill for digital assets, and then the strategic Bitcoin reserve is kind of on the back burner, which I think Senator Lummis and others would argue is probably not the right place for it on the priority list. It should be, this is a race. We are in a race to do this with between the federal government and the states and between our government and other countries. Politics kind of flows downhill from culture, and we've already seen it go from sort of a fringy retail asset now being adopted by the biggest financial institutions. And finally, the government is catching up. I think Senator Lummis is trying to light a fire here in DC to make people pay attention to this issue because it really is important. It could change the game in terms of our national debt and the devaluation of the dollar. It could just have such a profound positive long-term effect for the health of the country. She wants to highlight that, and she wants to make the case as strongly as possible, and that it should be Bitcoin only as a strategic asset because of its unique characteristics. So I'm looking forward to it. It will be very interesting because, like I said, it's leaders in politics and policy making combined with some of the most brilliant, successful corporate leaders in this space getting together to figure out what's best for America. After the disastrous Biden presidency, where they tried to put all of these companies out of business and foolishly tried to basically ban Bitcoin, it's a new day, and we can really seize leadership as a country in this space, and it's going to lead to a much brighter future. So Senator Lummis's leadership is excellent. It's needed. It is profound. And I think this event is going to be very educational for people. If you're not on the invited list, since it's somewhat limited capacity, definitely encourage you to watch the live stream, whichever portions of it are aired, especially Michael Saylor's keynote. That will be very enlightening, I think, for millions of people.
What I think is also noteworthy about this event is that it's going to draw crypto executives and not just Bitcoin executives. So you'll have several executives there from crypto exchanges, but the main theme here will be the Bitcoin reserve. And I think that's reflective of the growing consensus in the industry, even amongst the crypto folk, the non-Bitcoin folk, that Bitcoin is the preeminent digital asset and that the reserve that we create as a country should be Bitcoin only. I think you'll see a lot of that solidarity at this event itself. It will be reflected by the fact that you'll have both Bitcoiners there and crypto general executives, but all of them, I believe, will be behind the idea of a Bitcoin reserve, not this idea of a national crypto stockpile, but Bitcoin only reserve. So a lot to look forward to there. Always great to hear a keynote speech from Michael Saylor. I mean, he is the greatest Bitcoin bull out there, and there's honestly no better advocate for Bitcoin than Michael Saylor, and no better advocate in Congress than Senator Cynthia Lummis herself. So let's just take a step back for a second, Brian, and discuss the Bitcoin reserve and its prospects in the year ahead. If you could assign percentages, probabilities to the likelihood of a strategic Bitcoin reserve being created in the next year through either a legislative vehicle or through executive action, what sort of percentages would you apply to those possibilities?
Well, I think that it's a great question. And I want this number to be higher, but I'm going to put it at about a coin flip, about 50% that the federal government does it. As to whether a state government does it, like Texas, I think the chances are, almost 100%. That some states are going to do this. At the federal level, the reason why I give it only 50-50 is a couple of reasons. One, there are still a lot of skeptics out there trapped in an old paradigm of the existing legacy power structures in Washington, they haven't gotten the memo, as they say, they don't know what time it is. Like they are not reading the rest of the country. They only exist in their bubble. They don't yet see the value in this. So there will be some resistance from whatever you want to call it, the deep state, legacy media, etc. The other reason why I don't have it at a higher percentage is because every presidency doesn't go exactly as planned. They end up getting sidetracked by global events, by natural disasters, by tragedies, or just by some other something that happens that shifts their focus. I mean, in the first Trump administration, the coronavirus completely upended everything. So I just think, and hopefully, I'm not hoping, obviously, I don't want anything bad to happen. It's just that, you know, things happen and focus changes. There could be a, volatility in the market that leads to some kind of shift in the public policy conversation. So I think that it is very possible, but you never know what the future holds in Washington just because there's always so much resistance to new ideas, and you never know what world event could end up shifting the focus of a presidency. So I don't know. That's my take, but what do you think?
Yeah, I would assign the probability maybe a little bit higher. I'd say 60% chance that we get some kind of SBR. I think it's more likely, much more likely it comes to executive action than legislation, though if it were to come through the latter, even better. My sense is that Donald Trump, his motto is promises made, promises kept. And I don't think he'll leave the Bitcoin community out to dry on this particular issue. Of course, there can always be black swan events, like you mentioned, that can undermine any efforts to move these kinds of policies forward. I think another obstacle right now is the question related to funding the Bitcoin reserve. And, Brian, I know that's something that we've talked a lot about in our circles. We have an innovative idea for how to potentially fund the Bitcoin reserve through Bitcoin blended bonds. And we're going to roll out more of that idea in the weeks to come. So if we can make some progress in fleshing out how we can fund the Bitcoin reserve, I think that only increases the chances of a Bitcoin reserve being created. But overall, I'm bullish on it. But I do think we've got some work to do on the policy front to really help the American people understand that this is an idea that modernizes America's balance sheet, that moves us forward. If we have analog gold, it only makes sense that we would also hold digital gold on our balance sheet. So there's probably some work to do on the public relations front still, a lot of work to do on the policy front. But I think we can get there, but I agree. It's not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. So hopefully we get there, though. So shifting gears just a little bit from Bitcoin to the downfall of legacy media. So this podcast is all about Bitcoin. It's all about policy. It's all about politics. And Brian, you and I over the last year, we've been dutiful historians of the downfall of legacy media, cable news like MSNBC, CNN, the growing poor reputations of outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And we saw some really interesting developments this week that show that the decline of legacy media is hastening. Joy Reid, the infamous Joy Reid from MSNBC, she got fired this last week. In addition to that, there's another big shakeup at NBC with Lester Holt moving on to Dateline, quitting his nightly news role. And then this just adds to the many obituaries in legacy media that we've seen over the last year. This is fired, retired, or stepping down journalists. We've got Andrea Mitchell, Nora O'Donnell, Chris Wallace, Hoda Kotb, Neil Cavuto, Alex Wagner, Joy Reid, Chuck Todd, Jim Acosta, and Lester Holt. So it's an absolute bloodbath in media right now. And to add to their woes, we had a big development in the White House yesterday with Caroline Leavitt announcing that the White House Correspondents Association, which many view as a media cartel of sorts, will not hold the same sway in the new Trump administration. Let's give that a listen.
As you all know, for decades, a group of DC-based journalists, the White House Correspondents Association, has long dictated which journalists get to ask questions of the President of the United States in these most intimate spaces. Not anymore. I am proud to announce that we are going to give the power back to the people who read your papers, who watch your television shows, and who listen to your radio stations. Moving forward, The White House press pool will be determined by the White House press team. Legacy outlets who have participated in the press pool for decades will still be allowed to join, fear not, but we will also be offering the privilege to well-deserving outlets who have never been allowed to share in this awesome responsibility.
All right, big news there. Obviously, the White House Correspondents Association is not at all happy with this development. I think this is inside baseball in terms of DC politics, but it's important to help people across the country understand the power of the White House Correspondents Association. And Brian, you were a deputy White House press secretary in Trump 1.0 in the previous administration, and so you've dealt with this organization quite a bit. Tell us more about the White House Correspondents Association. What is the purpose of this organization? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for the country and for freedom of the press? And what does this say about legacy media and its trajectory?
Well, it's a very good decision. I fully support it. I'm glad Caroline is doing that. The White House Correspondents Association has had an inflated sense of its own importance for quite some time. It's essentially like a union, or I guess if you want to give it more gravitas, or more like the student government, I guess, of the press room. It would do, administrative things, assign seats, determine who gets to sit in the front row, determine who gets a seat since there's limited seats, determine who the pooler is. The pooler is, I think, the main focus of this announcement, and that's the one designee to chronicle the movements of the president and any words he utters in the course of a trip, for example. So if you go on Air Force One, the pooler would be, stating, all right, the president left the residence at, 11:04 a.m. and boarded Marine One, and then Marine One lands at Andrews Air Force Base at, 11:11 or whatever. And then, the president boards Air Force One. And then if he stops under the wing to talk to them, or if he comes back to the press cabin to gaggle, the pooler is the official chronicler who just has like the date stamps, the exact words that he says whenever he's available, and things like that. So it's sort of it's been reserved for the legacy institutions by the association because they're deemed the most credible in the eyes of the association. Obviously, that has changed. It's not a right. Nobody's got a right to make those determinations, I don't think. And so, having the administration governing the White House say, no, we're going to have more say in this. We're going to give others opportunities to do things that are meaningful and historic and informative to the American public. People are consuming their information in different ways these days than they used to. So I think modernizing the way the press operation works is a very good idea. The association, historically has wanted to it is a little cartelish, and they never wanted other sources to have access and to have a seat in the briefing room. There were other sort of newer media outlets that we would invite in, and the association would relegate them to standing in the back, like by the machinery and the cameras. And then they'd have to shout over the entire crowd just to ask a question because the association was kind of, I don't know, exclusive. They wanted to be exclusive. That's not the way a free press is supposed to work. So I do think this is a little bit of breaking up the cartel and widening the White House's reach. And of course, the people whose power is decreased by such a move are going to be upset. But that doesn't mean it's not the right move. I mean, I saw Caroline had tweeted at, I think it was Peter Baker at the New York Times, who was hysterical, talking about how Trump is basically Putin now, and like a communist dictator, because they're going to rotate the pooler. Like, dude, get a grip. Get a grip. Like, this is okay. It's actually broadening the scope. It's enhancing the freedom of information for the American people and the world. So good move. The legacy media is in free fall. I mean, most of the political reporters or Politico reporters, who is, by the way, they can be a pooler. They're in the Correspondents Association. They do all the legacy media stuff. Most of their senior DC reporters have left just in the last like year. The Washington Post just today announced that the editorial board is going to focus on liberty and free markets, which I've already seen meltdowns from their
Wow.
reporters saying this is interference in our, journalistic integrity or whatever. Okay, you've only had one side represented in your arguments
Right.
for like ever. Now that there might be a little bit of variety in the messaging coming out of the Post, they of course melt down. And this is it, when you institute something that is a promotion of freedom, the hysterics are hilarious because then it's all of a sudden you're trampling my freedom because you're giving somebody else freedom.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I'm on a tangent here, but I just find this very interesting and it's a good move. And it's not dramatic, it's not drastic. This is like a pretty measured approach. They could do way worse stuff. Like if the White House Correspondents Association really wants to fight, I mean, the White House could, I don't know, ban them from campus, put them at the old executive office building across the street. They still have offices in the West Wing of the White House. Like they still have the press room. They still have access to the president all the time. He does these hour-long gaggles in the Oval Office almost every day. He's going to do a cabinet meeting, I think, today, where I'm sure there will be a press avail as well. He's the most accessible president ever. But they tweak a little detail and say, we're going to rotate the pool designation a little more frequently, get a little broader audience. And they just completely rip all their hair out and go berserk. This is just, it's a good move by the White House, and the reaction to it is hilarious and very telling. And I think the American public should take solace in the fact that, like, this is fine. And if you're reacting really hostilely to this, maybe look in the mirror. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're the problem.
Yeah. Seems like the reaction from the media confirms that it was the right move. This is simply threatening the incumbents in the industry, and they don't like the fact that they're exposed to more competition as a result of this change. So it's interesting, your description of how the White House Correspondents Association works. Some people have said that it's cartel-like. From your description, it sounds like Mean Girls. It sounds like some kind of high school drama where you have the cool kids deciding who gets to sit at the cool kids table and who gets literally relegated to the back of the cafeteria. So I'm curious,
That's about right.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
How is that determined? Is there a vote within the organization, or is it the members that pay more dues have more say as to who sits where? Do you know how that works exactly?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, they have rotating elections, so different people take board seats and leadership positions. I think it's each year. But and so, if you are one of the outlets with a board seat or you're in a leadership position, I think you have a say over those things. But there's also just traditions, and that certain outlets have had certain seats for so long that if you decide to make a change, they're going to scream and yell and go crazy. So it's sort of a combination of just like the elected leadership and traditions that they don't want to change, which is really on brand when you think about this.
Yeah.
White House saying we're going to rotate the pooler and then going, no, like, yeah, I mean, it's just sort of intransigence and some authority vested in the elected leadership.
Right. It seems that anything Trump does, no matter how well intentioned, no matter how forward thinking, there's this media freak out at all times. And it seems like that's what's in large part sped the downfall of the legacy media. I always like to entertain counterfactuals. And there's times that I wonder if Donald Trump had never been elected in 2016 and again in 2024, what would be the state of the legacy media today? Do you think that they still would have self-destructed because technology was already hastening their decline? Or do you think that they would be just as powerful today as they were back in 2016 before Donald Trump was elected?
Trump definitely accelerated it. He has been an accelerant, and in a very good way, in creating a culture of accountability for the media that did not exist. I do think it would have happened anyway at some point. Elon Musk buying Twitter, I think, was probably the most profound change I've seen in recent years. Think about it. When Joe Biden was president for those intervening 4 years, the power of the legacy media weakened dramatically because in a democratic way, the small d democratic, the people looked for better sources of information. They knew they had been misled. I think throughout the COVID pandemic was probably the thing that opened the most eyes the fastest. So there really was sort of a democratic uprising to disrupt the media environment. Trump has been the best combatant against the media I've seen in my entire life. So he definitely hastened it. But I think it was going to happen because people weren't going to put up with it anymore. Just the one-sidedness, the gaslighting, the open partisanship, the lack of focus on issues that matter to people. It was going to be disrupted one way or another. I think Trump was the accelerant that made it happen a little faster.
Yeah, I see it similarly. It seems like there's 4 factors at play: Trump, COVID, Elon, and I would say the fourth would be just new technology. It seems like social media itself completely disrupted the legacy business model. Oftentimes, we spend a lot of our time on X just scanning the latest Bitcoin policy developments. And in the process of spending time on X, you recognize that there's this downstream effect where what you see on X, or formerly known as Twitter, today, you'll see in legacy outlets maybe 4 or 5 days from now, maybe a week from now. And so it's just so much faster. And legacy media is unable to compete with that in the same way that radio couldn't compete with video and with cable news. I think those 4 factors, Trump, COVID, Elon, just new and superior technology, have accelerated the decline of legacy media. You know, I think there's good people who work in legacy media, but they need to adapt. And you see a lot of them trying to adapt by leaving MSNBC or CNN and starting their own podcast. But it's an awkward transition for a lot of folks. There are people, though, who successfully make it. I think foremost among them is Megyn Kelly. And she was way ahead of the curve in deciding for herself to embrace new media completely. And her podcast today is one of the most popular, one of the most successful in the world. So kudos to Megyn Kelly and others in legacy media who read the tea leaves years ago and have since benefited significantly as a result. So not many tears being shed for the old media. New media seems to be superior in so many ways. Shout out to Rumble, for example, who gives us a platform to talk about these kinds of issues in a way that other platforms wouldn't. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and Rumble has a great model, and others, the ones you mentioned, obviously Elon's X and Megyn Kelly and others. The model is great because it's more audience driven. It's giving people the information that they want, some maybe countercultural opinions that weren't previously available. And this is all because the platforms that delivered the information are no longer captured, or they're still captured, but the audience has more options. Think about it. For decades, people had the nightly news on CBS, NBC, ABC. That was pretty much it. It was that, and they all had obviously very similar partisan proclivities and perspectives. Fox News was introduced to basically cater to, that niche audience of half the country, became very successful, but just having that option wasn't really enough, especially with the speed of information these days. So I think the developments are great because they're audience driven and their disruption is good. The capturing the means of delivery of information, I think, has been a weak point for the United States and the world really for decades. And I think we're entering a new era that is much more small d democratic, much more driven by the will of people. I think that's a good thing. And we're seeing the success, right? Like you said, Megyn Kelly is outperforming like all of CNN's digital assets by herself. And she has like 6 people working for her.
Yeah.
So anyway, we don't need to beat a dead horse, but the disruption is good.
Yeah, it seems like it's a transition from what was a media oligopoly to a media democracy. And I think that's better for everybody involved, except for the legacy media institutions. So, but I think it's something to be celebrated. To close this out today, we have our grab bag section. I'll just run with my grab bag content for the week. This was one of the funniest memes I've ever seen that perfectly describes the dynamic of crypto. For those who have not seen the bell curve meme, I think it's self-explanatory, where you have the caveman on the left and then the Jedi on the right. And so oftentimes with different issues, the caveman and the Jedi end up agreeing together. Whereas you have the midwit in the middle who oftentimes complains, who has some convoluted, overwrought explanation for why things are the way they are. And then you have the caveman in the middle and then the Jedi, or sorry, caveman on the left, Jedi on the right, who tend to agree with these things. So most often midwits hate crypto. They think that it's a scam. They think that it won't ever replace the legacy system, and they rail against it at every opportunity. Then you see luminaries from, Michael Saylor to Satoshi Nakamoto himself, to Vitalik Buterin, to Balaji Srinivasan, from Elon Musk to Mark Andreessen, who love crypto, who understand that this is a revolutionary technology, blockchain, that could forever change the way we interact with money. They are the Jedi Knights of the crypto industry. And then if you could pull it up one more time, Dylan, there is an army of Anons on the internet who more accurately represent the cavemen. They sense that there's something good here about this industry, that there's something potentially revolutionary about it. So they're invested in it. And it's a coalition between the cavemen and the Jedi Knights. And I love this tweet from Big D Bull. I think that tells you everything you need to know about the culture of crypto sometimes. He says, crypto is the apex predator of the bell curve meme, the final form, the smartest and the most mind-numbing, shockingly dumb people in the entire world. What a time to be alive. I just thought that meme was so funny because, Ryan, I don't know how your interactions on X have been, but sometimes you'll post content and you'll see the most insightful reactions to your posts. And then you'll post other content and you'll see the most mind-numbingly, shockingly dumb responses to the things you say. It's the cavemen and the Jedi interacting in real time. And I just got a real kick out of that one. So that's my grab bag content for the week.
That's about right. And I think if you look at that and you're like, oh gosh, am I a midwit? I think what you should do is the first step to unburdening yourself from midwittery is to recognize that you might be a midwit, and then hopefully move in the direction of the Jedi rather than the caveman, because probably what the caveman and the midwit share is a lack of self-awareness. So yeah, move towards the consciousness of the Jedi. But that would be my my recommendation. I think it's a hilarious meme too.
It's such a powerful meme too, because you can project it onto almost any issue. For example, the last election, it was so clear to me that the midwits were all in for Kamala, and then you had this coalition of cavemen and Jedi that were for Trump, right? And I think what unites those the cavemen and the Jedi is not necessarily thinking, it's intuition. It's almost common sense, right? And I think the midwits, in an attempt to try to appear smart, they try to intellectualize things that they don't need to, or they try to project things that aren't really there. And so I think you can take this meme. For me, this meme was life-changing because I'm a midwit in so many different areas. And when I can look at an issue and ask myself that specific question, am I a midwit right now? It's a good way to step back and kind of see an issue from a different perspective. And there's so many days in crypto where I'm definitely on the caveman side of things, but I think it was Socrates who said that true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. So I think there's wisdom in identifying with the caveman sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is a great meme. Yeah, for life. Where are you on the spectrum on any given issue, and try to improve yourself? Well, I had a lighter item for the grab bag. I am always excited to shamelessly shill my dog Larry. So in our house, we have a dog and a cat, but we're going to have a baby soon. So I wanted to show picture of Larry, our good boy. Dylan, if you can throw him up there. There he is, just smiling,
Larry.
being happy. And then I came across a really cute video that somebody posted of their baby with their golden retriever. Dylan, can you just the video? There you go. The dog rocking the baby. So
Yeah.
my hope, I've just spent a lot of time with like my in-laws getting it nursery ready and stuff. We're getting excited for the baby to arrive, and this is what I hope for our future is Larry rocking the baby very soon. So I didn't have anything that's all I wanted to highlight. Just cute dog pictures on the internet. I figured we talked about some heavy stuff. Let's end on that.
Love it. I hope you have a built-in babysitter in Larry. Honestly, we mentioned meme coins once this episode. I think a Larry coin would do significantly well just because he's such a cute dog, and he makes cameos every now and then in our podcast too. That's always fun.
That's right. All right. Maybe I got to get working on that. We're generally not in favor of meme coins here, but maybe a Larry coin could be an exception. I'll have to
Yeah.
look at that. That's cool. Well, this is a lot of fun. Anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think that sums things up for today.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Remember to follow us on Twitter, X, at MorganSternNJ, at SamLyman33. Like and subscribe. Send us your feedback, your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you next time on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod.